Chapter 23. We must now understand the aspect of Keter more particularly to understand how it is the aspect of an intermediary. In its inner aspect it possesses something of the last level of the emanator, while in its external aspect it is the root and head of the emanated, as stated in Eitz Chaim. Moreover, it is known that the first three Sephirot of Atik Yomin are separate and exalted, and do not become invested within the emanated. This is the meaning of the statement, "The king who alone is exalted, who transcends the days of the world." Because of this, it is called Atik Yomin, the Ancient of Days. Atik shares the same three-letter root as Hama'atik Harim, who removes mountains. In other words, Atik Yomin is removed from the days of the world. Now, all this is well known. Now, we must understand this in a manner of particulars, since Atik Yomin and Arich Anpin are considered to be one, except that in general the aspect of Atik Yomin is considered to be the end of the infinite world, whereas the aspect of Arich Anpin is the root of and beginning of the emanated worlds, as stated in Eitz Chaim. As known, the explanation of these matters is that these two levels of Keter are the aspects of pleasure and desire. Now we observe that within every desire there is a pleasure, and if not for the pleasure there would be no desire for the thing at all. This is like the desire for wealth or honor. If not for the pleasure of wealth or honor, he would have no desire for them at all. Therefore, seemingly pleasure is the inner aspect of desire. However, we observe the opposite as well, that if there is no desire, there is no pleasure. That is, he will derive no pleasure whatsoever from something he has no desire for. If so, then desire is inner to pleasure. What we see is that the one cannot exist without the other, because desire cannot exist without pleasure, and pleasure cannot exist without desire. According to this, we must say that the two are one, because it is only by means of their being bound together as one that Keter exists. All this holds true, whether it is the simple essential pleasure and desire, or whether it is a composite pleasure and desire that the soul spreads forth and is drawn after, even though it is not of the soul's essential self, but is rather a separate thing from it. Generally, we see that the nature of the soul is to be drawn after something pleasurable, to the point that its entire essential self could be drawn after it and invested in it. This is like a composite pleasure for a specific thing which is separate from the essential self, such as honor, wealth, insight, or the emotional traits of kindness, judgment, conquest, and self-aggrandizement, or the like. This is true of anything that the soul craves, such as lusting for all worldly pleasures and the like. Although none of these desires are in an aspect of an essential hiyuli pleasure, and it is only that the soul is drawn after them and lusts for them, nonetheless, from this we see that the essence of the soul is in an aspect of hiyuli of pleasure. It is for this reason that it is drawn to composite pleasures and flees from pain, which is the opposite of pleasure. These two, pleasure and pain, are two lines which are equally counterbalanced literally. Commensurate to the spreading forth of the soul to become filled with light from pleasurable things, so will its light become completely diminished and withdrawn by pain and anguish. From this we see that the essence of its being is pleasure. However, the principal proof for this is from the fact that it will flee and become withdrawn due to pain. This is a greater proof of this phenomenon. It is for this reason that the early Kabbalists decreed and stated that pleasure is considered to be of the essence of the soul, and they stated that there is nothing loftier than pleasure. However, this is not entirely true. Rather, the essential self of the soul becomes filled with great pleasure, and its entire essence is drawn after it, to the point that it may expire when it is almost entirely drawn into it. This is like the verse, "My soul expires," etc. The reverse is likewise true, that it will expire and its light will completely and absolutely be diminished by the intensity of extreme pain or anguish as known. Now, an even clearer proof of this is from what we observe regarding even the particular powers of the soul, that it is mainly the pleasure in a particular power which establishes its existence at all times. For example, regarding the power of the quality of kindness, although it is essential and natural in the nature of one who is good to bestow goodness, Nonetheless, its principal existence comes about from the pleasure, in that he takes pleasure in influencing goodness. The true existence of his good nature is that by nature he takes great pleasure in bestowing goodness, to the point that the main vitality of his soul comes about through the pleasure that he derives by doing acts of goodness and kindness. The reverse is true of someone who is cruel by nature. This only means that his entire vitality is the pleasure that he derives from perpetrating evil and cruelty as known. Likewise, the primary existence of the quality of victory is the immense pleasure which he derives, to the point that the entire vitality of his soul is drawn into being triumphant over his fellow. Should he not be victorious, he may actually become ill. Similarly, this is the case with each and every particular quality, including insight, chokhmah, and desire, ratzon. Their principal existence and source is the pleasure of them, as is clearly observable that without the pleasure in conceptualization, a person will not have the power to innovate any insight. This is in accordance with the statement, were it not for the pleasure in Torah, study, etc. Moreover, as known regarding the matter of a man's wisdom illuminates his face, that it is the lachluchit moisture within which is the hayuli for pleasure, which is the source for the conceptualization of any concept. However, it is only in regard to desire that we observe that without desire there cannot be pleasure. We find this phenomenon even in all the particular qualities. For example, if a person does not desire kindness or judgment, he will have no pleasure in them at all. Similarly, if he does not desire to become intelligent, he will find no pleasure in intellectual pursuits at all. Likewise, if he does not at all desire victory, he will have no pleasure in victory. The same is true of self-aggrandizement or all other worldly pleasures such as wealth or honor and the like. Without desire, there is no pleasure in them whatsoever. In other words, because the entire matter is that since the whole essential self of the soul is drawn after the pleasure and desire, therefore all its particular powers also derive their principal existence from the pleasure and the desire. The absence of pleasure and desire in any particular matter is the pain of the matter, this being the opposite of pleasure. If something stands in opposition to his desire, although in and of itself it is not necessarily a painful thing, he will automatically be agonized by it. For example, if he desires to love his enemy, he will delight in him. On the other hand, if he no longer desires one whom he does love, he will be agonized by him. Similarly, if he enjoys something which is hateful and damaging to him, he will desire it, or if he is pained by something that he loves, he will no longer desire it. This is because the desire and the pleasure are one essence, and it is important to know which precedes the other. At times, the one is internal and the other is external, while at other times the opposite is true. However, the one cannot be found without the other. For if there is no pleasure, there is no desire, and if there is no desire, there is no pleasure. This is the case whether it is a simple desire or pleasure, or whether it is a composite desire or pleasure, as mentioned above. This will suffice for those of understanding.